Triplanetary, first in the Lensman series by Doc Smith. Chapter 15, Specimens. Only too well founded was Costigan's conviction that the submarine of the deep-sea fishes had not been able to prevail against Nerado's formidable engines of destruction. For days the Nevian lifeboat, with its 3 terrestrial passengers, hurtled through the interstellar void without incident. But finally the operative's fears were realized. His far-flung detector screens reacted. Upon his observation plate they could see Nerado's mammoth spaceship in full pursuit of its fleeing lifeboat. "On your toes, folks, it won't be long now," Costigan called, and Bradley and Clio hurried into the tiny control room. Armor donned and tested, the 3 terrestrials stared into the observation plates, watching the rapidly enlarging picture of the Nevian spaceship. Nerado had traced them and was following them, and such was the power of the great vessel that the now inconceivable velocity of the lifeboat was the veriest crawl in comparison to that of the pursuing cruiser. "And we've hardly started to cover the distance back to Tellus. Of course you couldn't get in touch with anybody yet?" Bradley stated rather than asked. "I kept trying, of course, until they blanketed my wave, but all negative. Thousands of times too far for my transmitter. Our only hope of reaching anybody was the mighty slim chance that our supership might be prowling around out here already, but it isn't, of course. Here they are." Reaching out to the control panel, Costigan viciously shot out against the great vessel wave after wave of lethal vibrations, under whose fiercely clinging impacts the Nevians' defensive screens flared white. But strangely enough, their own screens did not radiate. As if contemptuous of any weapons the lifeboat might wield, the mothership simply defended herself from the attacking beams in much the same fashion as a wildcat mother wards off the claws and teeth of her spitting, snarling kitten who is resenting a touch of needed maternal discipline. "They probably wouldn't fight us at that." Clio first understood the situation. "This is their own lifeboat, and they want us alive, you know." "There's one more thing we can try. Hang on," Costigan snapped, as he released his screens and threw all his power into one enormous pressor beam. The 3 were thrown to the floor and held there by an awful weight as the lifeboat darted away at the stupendous acceleration of the beam's reaction against the unimaginable mass of the Nevian sky rover. But the flight was of short duration. Along that pressor beam there crept a dull red rod of energy, which surrounded the fugitive shell and brought it slowly to a halt. Furiously then Costigan set and reset his controls, launching his every driving force and his every weapon. But no beam could penetrate that red murk, and the lifeboat remained motionless in space. No, not motionless. The red rod was shortening, drawing the truant craft back toward the launching port from which she had so hopefully emerged a few days before. Back and back it was drawn, Costigan's utmost efforts futile to effect by a hair's breadth its line of motion. Through the open port the boat slipped neatly, and as it came to a halt in its original position within the multi-layered skin of the monster, the prisoners heard the heavy doors clang shut behind them, one after another. And then sheets of blue fire snapped and crackled about the 3 suits of triplanetary armor. The 2 large human figures and the small ones were outlined starkly in blinding blue flame. "That's the first thing that has come off according to schedule," Costigan laughed, a short, fierce bark. "That is their paralyzing ray. We've got it stopped cold, and we've each of us got enough iron to hold it forever." "But it looks as though the best we can do is a stalemate," Bradley argued. "Even if they can't paralyze us, we can't hurt them, and we are headed back for Nevia. I think Nerado will come in for a conference, and we'll be able to make terms of some kind. He must know what these Lewistons will do, and he knows that we'll get a chance to use them some way or other before he gets to us again," Costigan asserted confidently, but again he was wrong. The door opened, and through it there waddled, rolled, or crawled a metal-clad monstrosity, a thing with wheels, legs, and writhing tentacles of jointed bronze, a thing possessed of defensive screens sufficiently powerful to absorb the full blast of the triplanetary projectors without effort. 3 brazen tentacles reached out through the ravening beams of the Lewistons, smashed them to bits, and wrapped themselves in unbreakable shackles about the armored forms of the 3 human beings. Through the door the machine or creature carried its helpless load, and out into and along a main corridor, and soon the 3 terrestrials, without arms, without armor, and almost without clothing, were standing in the control room, again facing the calm and unmoved Nerado. To the surprise of the impetuous Costigan, the Nevian commander was entirely without rancor. "The desire for freedom is perhaps common to all forms of animate life," he commented through the transformer. "As I told you before, however, you are specimens to be studied by the College of Science, and you will be so studied in spite of anything you may do. Resign yourselves to that." "Well, say that we don't try to make any more trouble, that we cooperate in the examination and give you whatever information we can," Costigan suggested. "Then you will probably be willing to give us a ship and let us go back to our own world." "You will not be allowed to cause any more trouble," the amphibian declared coldly. "Your cooperation will not be required. We will take from you whatever knowledge and information we wish. In all probability you will never be allowed to return to your own system, because as specimens you are too unique to lose. But enough of this idle chatter. Take them back to their quarters." Back to their 3 intercommunicating rooms the prisoners were led under heavy guard, and, true to his word, Nerado made certain that they had no more opportunities to escape. To Nevia the spaceship sped without incident, and in manacles the terrestrials were taken to the College of Science, there to undergo the physical and psychical examinations which Nerado had promised them. Nor had the Nevian scientist captain erred in stating that their cooperation was neither needed nor desired. Furious but impotent, the human beings were studied in laboratory after laboratory by the coldly analytical, unfeeling scientists of Nevia, to whom they were nothing more or less than specimens. And in full measure they came to know what it meant to play the part of an unknown, lowly organism in a biological research. They were photographed externally and internally. Every bone, muscle, organ, vessel, and nerve were studied and charted. Every reflex and reaction was noted and discussed. Meters registered every impulse, and recorders filmed every thought, every idea, and every sensation. Endlessly, day after day, the nerve-racking torture went on, until the frantic subjects could bear no more. White-faced and shaking, Clio finally screamed wildly, hysterically, as she was being strapped down upon a laboratory bench, and at the sound Costigan's nerves, already at the breaking point, gave way in an outburst of berserk fury. The man's struggles and the girl's shrieks were alike futile, but the surprised Nevians, after a consultation, decided to give the specimens a vacation. To that end they were installed, together with their earthly belongings, in a 3-roomed structure of transparent metal, floating in the large central lagoon of the city. There they were left undisturbed for a time, undisturbed, that is, except by the continuous gaze of the crowd of hundreds of amphibians which constantly surrounded the floating cottage. "First we're bugs under a microscope," Bradley growled. "Then we're goldfish in a bowl. I don't know that—" He broke off as 2 of their jailers entered the room. Without a word into the transformers they seized Bradley and Clio. As those tentacular arms stretched out toward the girl, Costigan leaped. A vain attempt. In midair the paralyzing beam of the Nevians touched him, and he crashed heavily to the crystal floor. And from that floor he looked on in helpless, raging fury, while his sweetheart and his captain were carried out of their prison and into a waiting submarine. End of chapter 15.